The stars outside the observation window looked peaceful. Lieutenant Cole stood with her hands behind her back, watching the endless darkness of space. She had been serving on the reconnaissance vessel Starbound Hope for 2 years now. In all that time, she had never seen anything like what was about to happen. The ship was small compared to the massive warships that protected Earth's colonies. It carried only 80 crew members and was designed for exploration, not combat. They were mapping the outer edges of known space when the sensors detected something unusual. "Lieutenant Cole, you need to see this," said Ensign Danny Marsh from his station. His voice was shaky and his face had gone pale. Walked over to his screen and looked at the readings. A massive ship had just dropped out of hyperspace less than 50 kilometers away. It was at least 10 times the size of the Starbound Hope. The design was unlike anything in their database. Sharp angles and crystalline structures covered its hull, catching the light from distant stars and throwing it back in rainbow patterns. "Get the captain," said quietly. Captain Brooks arrived on the bridge within minutes. He was a tall man in his 50s with gray hair and calm eyes. He had served in the fleet for 30 years and had seen many strange things, but even he stopped short when he saw the alien vessel on the main screen. "Have they tried to communicate?" he asked. "Not yet, sir," replied Communications Officer Lisa Grant. She was young, barely 25, but she was one of the best in her field. Her fingers moved quickly across her console. "Wait, I'm receiving something now." The bridge fell silent as the transmission came through. At first there was only static. Then a voice spoke. It was deep and harsh, like the sound of stones grinding together. "Primitive vessel, you are now in space. You will surrender your ship and prepare for neural cataloging. Resistance will result in immediate termination." Captain Brooks took a deep breath. He looked around at his crew. Some of them were scared, others were confused, but all of them were waiting for his orders. "Open a channel," he said. "Let me speak to them." Lisa nodded and pressed a button. "Channel open, sir." "This is Captain Brooks of the human vessel Starbound Hope. We are on a peaceful exploration mission. We mean no harm to your people. Perhaps we can discuss this situation and find a solution that works for both of us." There was a long pause. Then the alien voice returned, and this time it was laughing. The sound sent chills down spine. "Discussion. You wish to discuss with your ignorance is amusing, soft-bodied creature. We have conquered 17 star systems. We have absorbed the knowledge of dozens of species. Our crystalline minds operate on frequencies your primitive brains cannot even imagine. You do not discuss with us. You obey." The transmission ended abruptly. Captain Brooks turned to his tactical officer. "What do we know about them?" Lieutenant Commander Greg Palmer pulled up everything the ship's computer had on the. It was not much. They were a species of crystalline beings who had been expanding their territory aggressively for the past century. Every species they encountered either submitted to their rule or was destroyed. Their technology was advanced, their military was powerful, and they showed no mercy. "Sir, we can't fight them," Greg said honestly. "Our weapons won't even scratch that ship." "I know," the captain replied. He rubbed his forehead, thinking hard. "But maybe we don't have to fight." Listened to the conversation, but her attention was on something else. Her right hand moved slowly to her left wrist, where a simple silver bracelet rested against her skin. It looked like nothing special, just a piece of jewelry that any woman might wear. But it was not jewelry. It was the result of 3 years of secret research. The Quantum Containment Initiative had produced these devices for situations exactly like this one. Only a handful of people in the entire fleet knew about them. Was one of those people. She caught the eye of Specialist Park across the bridge. He was one of the others. He gave her a tiny nod, so small that no one else would notice. They both knew what might happen next. The alien ship moved closer. On the screen, they could see dozens of smaller shapes detaching from it. Transport pods, probably carrying soldiers. "They're sending a boarding party," Danny reported, his voice cracking slightly. Captain Brooks straightened his uniform. "All hands, this is the captain. We are about to receive visitors. I want everyone to remain calm and follow my orders. Do not resist. Do not provoke them. Our goal is to survive this encounter. Brooks out." The crew moved to their assigned positions. Took her place among them, standing 3 rows back from where the captain would meet the aliens. She looked like just another officer, waiting nervously for whatever would come next. But inside, her heart was beating fast with something other than fear. It was anticipation. They had conquered 17 star systems. They had never lost a battle. They believed they were superior to every other species in the galaxy. They had never met humans before. The first transport pod attached to the Starward Hope's hull with a loud clang that echoed through the corridors. Then another, and another, counted at least 8 pods in total. "They're cutting through the airlock," someone reported. Captain Brooks stood tall in the center of the cargo bay where the aliens would enter. His crew surrounded him, unarmed and waiting. They looked helpless. They looked defeated. That was exactly what they wanted them to think. Touched her bracelet one more time, feeling the cool metal against her skin. The device was fully charged and ready. All she needed was the right moment. The airlock door exploded inward, and the soldiers came through. They were terrifying. Each one stood nearly 8 feet tall. Their bodies were made of living crystal that caught the light and scattered it in all directions. Their faces had no real features, just smooth surfaces with dark spots where eyes might be. They moved with a strange grace, their crystalline forms making soft chiming sounds with every step. At the front of the group was the largest of all, Commander Ev. He looked at the humans the way a person might look at insects, with complete contempt. He walked straight up to Captain Brooks and spoke in that grinding voice. "You are now property of the Empire. Your resistance was wise to avoid. Perhaps some of you will be allowed to live." The captain said nothing. He just stood there, his jaw tight. Watched from her position, waiting. The trap was not yet ready to spring. But soon it would be. The cargo bay had never felt so small. 40 soldiers stood among the human crew, their crystalline bodies filling the space with strange reflections and soft chiming sounds. The air itself seemed to vibrate with their presence. Commander Eth walked slowly through the gathered humans, studying them like a farmer might study livestock. His dark eye spots moved from face to face, and each person he looked at seemed to shrink back slightly. "Such fragile creatures," he said, his voice grinding like rocks in a tumbler. "Soft skin, weak bones, organs made of water and meat. How did your species even survive long enough to reach the stars?" No one answered. Captain Brooks had ordered them to stay quiet, and they obeyed. Eth stopped in front of a young ensign named Tommy Blake. The boy was barely 20 years old, fresh out of the academy. His hands were shaking, and sweat was running down his face. "This one is afraid," the commander observed. "I can see the heat rising from his body. I can hear his heart beating too fast." He leaned closer to Tommy. "Tell me, little creature, what do you fear?" Tommy swallowed hard but did not speak. "Answer me," Eth demanded. "I fear nothing," Tommy said, his voice cracking. The commander laughed. That terrible grinding sound filled the cargo bay again. "A lie? How interesting. Your species can lie even when death stands before you. This might make you useful for certain tasks." He turned away from Tommy and addressed all the humans at once. "You will be processed and cataloged. Your memories will be scanned and added to our collective knowledge. Your bodies will be examined to determine what labor you are suited for. Those who cooperate will be treated well. Those who resist will be destroyed." One of his soldiers stepped forward and grabbed the arm of a female crew member. She cried out in pain as the crystalline fingers dug into her flesh. "Let her go," Tommy shouted. Before anyone could stop him, he rushed forward and pushed the soldier. It was like pushing a wall. The soldier did not move at all, but Tommy's action had been noticed. Eth turned slowly. His crystalline body seemed to grow brighter, and a low humming sound came from somewhere inside him. The young one wishes to fight. How entertaining. He raised one of his arms. The crystalline surface shifted and changed, forming into a sharp point that glowed with inner light. Without any warning, he swung his arm and struck Tommy across the chest. The young ensign flew backward and crashed into a stack of cargo containers. He lay still on the ground, unconscious and bleeding. "Tommy," someone screamed. Watch from her position in the third row. Her hands were clenched into fists at her sides. Every part of her wanted to move, to act, to do something. But she forced herself to stay calm. The moment was not right. Not yet. Eth looked at the fallen human with something like satisfaction. "Let this be a lesson. Your bodies are weak. Your weapons are primitive. You cannot hurt us. You can only serve us or die." He turned to his soldiers and gave orders in a language that sounded like breaking glass. They began to move through the crowd, separating the humans into groups. Men on one side, women on another, officers in a third group. Captain Brooks was pushed roughly toward the officer group. He stumbled but caught himself. His eyes found in the crowd, and for just a moment something passed between them. A silent message, a question. Gave him the smallest shake of her head. Not yet. The captain looked away and allowed himself to be moved with the others. Park ended up standing next to. He leaned close and whispered without moving his lips, "How much longer?" "We need him closer," whispered back. "And we need his soldiers spread out. The field has a limited range." Nodded slightly and said nothing more. The separation process continued. Families were torn apart. Friends were pushed in different directions. Some people cried. Others looked angry, but no one else tried to resist. Tommy's fate had shown them what would happen if they did. Eth watched all of this with obvious pleasure. He walked among the groups, making comments about individual humans. This one looked strong enough for mining. That one was too old to be useful. These young ones might be bred to create better workers. His words were cruel, but his tone was casual. To him, humans were nothing, less than nothing. They were resources to be used and discarded. "Your species will make adequate labor stock," he announced loudly. "Perhaps in 1,000 years, once you have been properly bred and conditioned, you might even prove useful. They have done this with many species. We improve them. We make them better than they were." He paused and looked around the cargo bay. "Of course, the original cultures are always lost. Your history, your art, your beliefs, all of that will be erased. You will become what we need you to be, nothing more." A woman in the group began to sob quietly. Her name was Carol Martinez, and she was one of the ship's doctors. She had 2 children back on Earth who she might never see again. Felt her heart ache for Carol and for all of them, but she pushed the feeling down. Emotions would not help them now. Only patience and timing would save them. Eth continued his speech. "The process of integration takes approximately 3 of your generations. By then, all memory of your former existence will be gone. Your great will think of themselves as servants, happy to serve their masters." He spread his crystalline arms wide. "This is not destruction. This is elevation. We are lifting you up from your primitive state. You should be grateful." No one looked grateful, but no one spoke either. Finally, Eth turned his attention to the officer group. He walked over to Captain Brooks and looked down at him. "You are the leader of this vessel. Your mind will be scanned first. We are curious about your military protocols, your communication codes, your knowledge of other human territories." Captain Brooks met his gaze without flinching. "I won't tell you anything." "You won't need to tell us anything," Eth replied. "The scanning process extracts information directly from your brain tissue. It is quite painful but very effective. You will have no choice in the matter." 2 soldiers moved forward to grab the captain. That was when stepped out of the crowd. She walked forward calmly, her boots clicking on the metal floor. The sound was loud in the sudden silence. Every eye in the cargo bay turned to look at her. Human eyes filled with confusion and fear. Eye spots filled with cold curiosity. Eth held up a crystalline hand, stopping his soldiers. He watched the small human female approach with something that might have been amusement. "Another one wishes to speak," he said. "How brave or how foolish." Stopped a few feet away from him. She looked tiny compared to his massive crystalline form, but her eyes were steady and her voice was calm. "Commander Eth, my name is Lieutenant Cole, Tactical Containment Division." The commander tilted his head. "Tactical containment, I do not know this term. What does it mean?" Smiled. "You're about to find out." Cargo bay had gone completely silent. Even the soft chiming sounds of the soldiers seemed to fade as everyone watched the small human woman standing before their massive commander. Eth looked down at with his dark eye spots. His crystalline body caught the cargo bay lights and scattered them in patterns that danced across the walls. He was beautiful in a strange, cold way, beautiful and terrifying. "Tactical Containment Division," he repeated slowly. The words sounded strange in his grinding voice. "This is a military term, yes. You are some kind of soldier." "Something like that," replied. Several soldiers raised their weapons and pointed them at her. Their arms had shifted into sharp, glowing points similar to what Eth had used to strike down Tommy. One word from their commander and would be cut to pieces. But she did not move. She did not look at the weapons. She kept her eyes fixed on Eth. "You are either very brave or very stupid," the commander said. "I have not yet decided which." "Maybe both," admitted, "but I'm also here to give you a warning." The soldiers made sounds that might have been laughter. Their crystalline bodies vibrated, producing a chorus of high-pitched chimes. The idea of a human warning their commander was apparently very funny to them. Eth did not laugh. He studied with something that looked almost like interest. "A warning. You stand before me, surrounded by my soldiers with no weapons and no hope of escape, and you wish to warn me." "Yes." "Then speak, amuse me before you die." Took a deep breath. She could feel the eyes of her on her back. She could feel watching from somewhere in the crowd. She could sense Captain Brooks trying to understand what she was doing. "Your empire has conquered 17 star systems," she began. "You have defeated dozens of species. Your technology is advanced and your soldiers are powerful. I understand all of that." Eth nodded slightly. "Good, at least you are not completely ignorant." "But you've never encountered humans before," continued. "You don't know anything about us. You see small, soft creatures with fragile bodies and you assume we are weak." "Because you are weak," Eth interrupted. "This is not an assumption. It is a fact. Your bodies can be broken with a single blow. Your minds operate on such slow frequencies that we can barely detect your thoughts. You are among the most primitive species we have ever encountered." Nodded. "You're right. Physically, we can't match you. Our bodies are soft and our minds are slow compared to yours." "Then what is the point of this warning?" Eth asked. He sounded almost bored now. "The point is that humans have always been weak," said. "For millions of years, we were just another animal on our planet. We couldn't run as fast as the predators. We couldn't fight as well as the great beasts. Our claws were dull, our teeth were small, and our skin offered no protection." She paused, letting the words sink in. "And yet we survived. We spread across our entire world. We climbed to the top of the food chain. We conquered creatures that were bigger, faster, and stronger than us in every way." Eth's eye spots seemed to narrow. "How?" "By thinking," replied. "By watching, by learning. We studied our enemies, found their weaknesses, and created tools to exploit those weaknesses. A human with a sharp stick could kill a beast 10 times its size. A human with a trap could capture creatures that could easily tear it apart in open combat." "Interesting," the commander admitted. But your primitive hunting strategies are meaningless here. We are not beasts to be caught in traps." Smiled. It was a small smile, just a slight curve of her lips, but there was something in it that made Eth pause. "Are you sure about that?" she asked. For the first time since boarding the ship, the commander seemed uncertain. He leaned down, bringing his faceted face close to us. They were almost touching now. She could feel the cold radiating from his crystalline body. "You think you can threaten me?" he asked, his voice dropping to a low growl. "You think your species has something that can hurt the—" "I think you should reconsider your position," said calmly. Eth's body began to glow brighter. The humming sound returned, louder than before. The other soldiers shifted nervously, sensing their commander's rising anger. "Humans cannot control me," he said, each word grinding like stones in a mill. "No species has ever controlled the. Our minds are fortresses of living crystal. We are immune to manipulation. We are immune to coercion. We are immune to technological interference of any kind." He stood up to his full height, towering over like a mountain of light and glass. "You have nothing," he declared. "You are nothing. Your warning is empty and your courage is wasted. I will enjoy scanning your brain personally. Perhaps your foolishness will provide some small entertainment." Did not step back. She did not show any fear. She simply looked up at the massive alien commander and spoke 4 simple words. "You should have listened." Her right hand moved to her left wrist, touching the silver bracelet that rested there. Her thumb found the small raised surface on the inner band, the activation switch. Eth saw the movement. His eye spots tracked her hand and something flickered in their dark depths. Confusion, perhaps, or the first tiny spark of concern. "What is that device?" he demanded. "This," held up her wrist, showing him the bracelet. "It's just a little something our scientists put together. They've been studying your species for 3 years now, learning about your crystalline biology, understanding how your bodies work." The commander's glow flickered. "That is impossible. We have never encountered your species before today." "You haven't," agreed. "But we've encountered you. Or at least, we've encountered enough of your technology and your biological samples to understand what you are." She lowered her arm and locked eyes with him. "You see, Commander, humans have been watching the galaxy for a long time. We've seen your empire expand. We've studied the species you've conquered. And we've been preparing for the day when you finally came for us." Eth was silent for a moment. Then he let out another grinding laugh. "Preparing? With what? Your primitive weapons cannot harm us. Your ships cannot match our fleet. What could you possibly have prepared?" "A trap," said simply. She pressed the activation switch. The effect was instantaneous. A pulse of blue light erupted from the bracelet, spreading outward in all directions like a wave in water. It moved so fast that no one could react. In less than a heartbeat, the light had expanded to fill the entire cargo bay. And then they stopped moving. Every single one of them, 40 soldiers and their commander, frozen in place like statues made of glass. Their bodies still glowed, but they could not move. They could not speak. They could not even turn their heads. Stood in the center of the silent cargo bay, surrounded by paralyzed aliens. She looked up at Eth's frozen face and saw something she had never expected to see in those dark eye spots. "Fear." "You said humans can't control you," she said quietly. "I guess you were wrong." Silence in the cargo bay was absolute. 80 human crew members stood frozen in shock, staring at the impossible scene before them. 40 soldiers, the most feared warriors in the known galaxy, stood completely motionless. Their crystalline bodies still glowed with inner light, but they were as still as statues in a museum. Commander Eth's dark eye spots were fixed on. She could see the fury in them and the fear and the confusion. He was trying to move, trying to speak, trying to do anything at all, but his body refused to obey his commands. Walked slowly around the frozen commander, her boots clicking on the metal floor. The sound echoed in the quiet bay. "The device generates something called a quantum lattice field," she explained calmly. "It creates a web of energy that interacts with crystalline molecular structures. The more complex and organized the crystal, the stronger the effect." She stopped in front of Eth and looked up at him. "Your bodies are made of some of the most complex crystalline structures we've ever seen. Your neural networks are like perfect geometric patterns, all connected and organized in beautiful mathematical ways." She tilted her head slightly. "Which means the field holds you than it would hold anything else. Your own biological advantage has become your greatest weakness." A sound came from Ed then. It was quiet and strained, like glass cracking under pressure. He was trying to speak. "How?" The word came out slowly, forced through a body that did not want to cooperate. "How is this possible?" Crossed her arms and considered the question. "We started developing this technology 3 years ago," she said. "Our deep space probes had detected your expansion patterns. We knew it was only a matter of time before you reached human territory, so we started preparing." She gestured toward Park, who was already moving through the frozen soldiers, checking to make sure the containment field was stable. "We gathered samples of materials from battlefields and abandoned outposts. We studied your biology, your technology, your everything. And then we built something specifically designed to stop you." "This is impossible," Eth managed to say. His voice was barely a whisper now. "No species has ever—" "No species has ever what?" interrupted. "No species has ever studied you. No species has ever prepared for you. No species has ever fought back." She shook her head slowly. "That's the problem with empires, Commander. You get so used to winning that you forget what it feels like to lose. You stop being careful. You stopped respecting your enemies. And eventually, you met someone who was watching and waiting and ready." Captain Brooks pushed his way through the crowd of crew members. He was smiling, but there were tears in his eyes. He stopped beside and put a hand on her shoulder. "Well done, Lieutenant," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Well done." "Thank you, sir," replied. "But we're not finished yet. The field will hold them for about 6 hours. After that, we'll need to recharge the devices or find another solution." The captain nodded and turned to address his crew. "All right, everyone. You heard the lieutenant. We have 6 hours to secure these prisoners and figure out our next move. I want security teams on each of these soldiers. Medical team, check on Ensign Blake. Everyone else, return to your stations and prepare for possible reinforcements." The crew snapped into action. After the fear and helplessness of the past hour, they were eager to do something useful. Security officers surrounded the frozen soldiers. Dr. Carol Martinez rushed to Tommy Blake's side and began treating his injuries. Watched all of this with quiet satisfaction, but her attention kept returning to Eth. The commander's eye spots followed her wherever she went, burning with impotent rage. She walked back over to him and stood close enough to speak quietly. "You know what I find interesting?" she asked. "You told me that humans couldn't control you. You were so certain, so confident. You really believed that nothing in the universe could stop the—" Eth said nothing. Perhaps he couldn't speak anymore. Perhaps he was just too angry. "But here's the thing," continued. "Humans have a long history of doing impossible things. We've gone from living in caves to flying through the stars in just a few thousand years. We've cured diseases that killed millions. We've split atoms and rebuilt genes. We've done all of this not because we're the strongest or the fastest or the— We've done it because we never give up and we never stop learning." She reached out and touched the smooth, cold surface of his crystalline chest. "You saw weak creatures in soft bodies. You saw easy prey. What you should have seen was the most adaptable, most persistent, most stubbornly creative species in the galaxy." She stepped back and smiled. "Now you know better." Park approached and spoke quietly too. "The field is stable across all targets. No fluctuations. The other officers with devices are spreading out to cover any gaps. "How many devices do we have total?" asked. "7 on this ship, enough to keep this group contained for as long as we need." "Good." Looked around the cargo bay at the frozen soldiers. Each one was being carefully guarded by human security officers. Some of the crew members looked nervous, standing so close to the alien warriors, but they held their positions bravely. Captain Brooks returned from checking on Tommy Blake. "The ensign will be okay," he reported. "Broken ribs and a concussion, but he'll recover." "That's good news, sir," said. "What about their ship?" the captain asked, nodding toward the soldiers. "Can they communicate with it while frozen?" Shook her head. "The field disrupts all electromagnetic activity from their bodies. They can't send or receive any signals, but their ship will notice eventually that the boarding party hasn't reported in." "How long do we have?" "Hard to say. Maybe an hour before they get suspicious, maybe less." Captain Brooks rubbed his chin thoughtfully. "We need to get out of here. Our ship can't outrun or outfight that warship." "Actually, sir, we might have another option." Pulled a small data pad from her pocket and handed it to the captain. "Before I was assigned to the Starboard Hope, I served on the technical team that developed these devices. I know quite a bit about technology." The captain looked at the data pad. His eyebrows rose as he read the information on the screen. "You think you can do this?" "I think we can try, sir, with your permission." Captain Brooks looked at for a long moment. Then he looked at the frozen commander, still paralyzed and helpless despite all his power and arrogance. "Lieutenant Cole," he said finally, "you have exceeded every expectation today. You have my complete trust. Do whatever you think is necessary." Nodded and turned to, "Gather the engineering team. We have work to do." As she walked out of the cargo bay, she paused to look back at Eth one more time. "I hope you're taking notes, Commander," she said. "Class is just getting started." Then she was gone, leaving the frozen aliens under the watchful eyes of their human captors. The hunters had become the prey, and the prey had just shown their teeth. News traveled fast in the galaxy, even across the vast distances between star systems. Within days of the incident aboard the Starboard Hope, every major species had heard the story. The Empire, the most feared power in known space, had been humiliated by a species they had never even considered a threat. The recording spread through communication networks like wildfire. Someone had captured the entire confrontation, from Eth's arrogant speech to the moment the quantum field froze his entire unit. The image of a small human woman standing before the paralyzed alien commander became famous across dozens of worlds. The High Council was in chaos. For the first time in centuries, they faced an enemy they could not simply overwhelm with superior numbers and technology. Their crystalline biology, which had always been their greatest strength, had become a weakness that the humans could exploit at will. The occupation fleet that had been traveling toward Earth's solar system stopped its advance. The commanders were afraid to proceed. What other traps had the humans prepared? What other weaknesses had they discovered? On Earth, the mood was one of cautious celebration. Lieutenant Cole was promoted to commander and given a medal for her bravery, but she did not care much about medals. She was already working on the next generation of containment technology, preparing for whatever they might try next. Captain Brooks was promoted as well and given command of a new ship, one of the advanced warships that Earth had been secretly building for years. The Starboard Hope returned home as a hero vessel. Its crew celebrated as the first humans to successfully stand against the alien empire. Park joined research team. Together, they worked to improve the quantum lattice technology and adapt it for different situations. The original wrist devices had been designed for close encounters. Now they needed weapons that could work across larger distances. 6 months after the incident, a message arrived from space. The High Council wished to open negotiations with humanity. They proposed a meeting on neutral ground, a space station in unclaimed territory between their borders. The human government agreed, and they chose their delegation carefully. President Julia would lead the team, accompanied by military advisors and diplomatic experts, but they also included one person whose presence sent a clear message to the Commander Cole. She arrived at the neutral station wearing her dress uniform, with the silver bracelet still clasped around her wrist. The representatives noticed it immediately. Their crystalline bodies seemed to flicker with unease whenever they looked at it. The negotiations took place in a large chamber with a round table at its center. The human delegation sat on one side, the on the other. For the first time in history, the two species faced each other as equals. The ambassador was a tall being named. Unlike Eth, he spoke in careful, measured tones. He did not make threats or demands. He simply presented his empire's position and waited for responses. The talks went on for days. Territory disputes, trade agreements, prisoner exchanges, all the complicated details that went into establishing peace between two civilizations. On the third day, Ambassador requested a private meeting with Commander Cole. President agreed, curious to see what would happen. They met in a small conference room, just the two of them, studied for a long moment before speaking. Commander Cole, he began, I have a question that has been troubling my people since your encounter with Commander Eth. Ask it, replied. How did you do it? The ambassador's voice was soft, almost wondering. Your species is so young. You have been traveling among the stars for such a short time, and yet you developed technology that neutralized our greatest advantage. How is this possible? Consider the question carefully before answering. When I was a child, she said, my grandmother told me a story about our ancestors. Thousands of years ago, humans were hunted by large animals with sharp teeth and powerful claws. We had no fur to keep us warm, no armor to protect us, no natural weapons to fight back. Listened silently. But we survived, continued. We watched the animals that hunted us. We learned their habits, their weaknesses, their fears, and then we used that knowledge against them. We built traps. We made weapons. We worked together in groups. Within a few generations, the hunters became the hunted. She leaned forward slightly. That's what humans do, Ambassador. When we face a problem we can't solve with strength, we solve it with thought. We study, we learn, we adapt, and we overcome. It doesn't matter how powerful our enemy is. Given enough time, we will find a way. Was silent for a long moment. Is this why your people did not surrender? He asked finally. Even when Commander Eth threatened to destroy you, you did not give up hope. We never give up hope, said simply. It's not in our nature. The ambassador nodded slowly. I believe I am beginning to understand your species, Commander. You are not as weak as you appear. No, agreed, we're not. When the negotiations concluded a week later, the resulting treaty was unlike anything they had ever signed before. For the first time in their history, they agreed to treat another species as true equals. Trade would flow between their territory and human space. Military forces would respect each other's borders, and the technology used against Commander Eth would be shared with neither side, locked away to prevent future conflicts. On the day the treaty was signed, Ambassador approached one final time. Commander Cole, he said, I have one more question. Yes. The other humans, are they all like you? Thought about her on the Starward Hope. She thought about Tommy Blake, who had rushed to defend a fellow crew member despite knowing he could not win. She thought about Captain Brooks, who had stayed calm in the face of impossible odds. She thought about Park, Carol Martinez, Lisa Grant, and all the others who had stood together when their world was falling apart. Actually, she said, I'm considered one of the patient ones. Ambassador stared at her for a moment. Then, surprisingly, he made a sound that might have been laughter. It was not the grinding, cruel laughter of Commander Eth. It was something softer, almost respectful. "Then I think," he said slowly, "that my people are fortunate this war did not go further. The galaxy is perhaps not ready for what humanity might become." Smiled and offered her hand. The ambassador hesitated for just a moment, then reached out with his crystalline appendage and touched her palm gently. It was a small gesture, a simple handshake between two very different beings, but it marked the beginning of something new. They had come to conquer. Instead, they had found equals, and humanity had taken its first real step into a much larger universe. The stars were waiting, and this time humanity would face them not as prey, but as one of the hunters. Cole looked out the window of the station at the vast expanse of space beyond. Somewhere out there were more species, more challenges, more impossible problems to solve. She smiled and touched her bracelet. Whatever came next, humanity would be ready.